Is it possible to control the uncontrollables on your farming operation, like heat stress, drought stress, cold stress? We're going to talk about that on this episode of the Agronomy Answers podcast. I invited Matt Thompson, the Hefty Naturals brand manager, to talk about this topic, the uncontrollables. Can you do that? How does it work?
That's a really interesting question for the season that we're having right now, right, Zach? So it seems like every year more and more noise starts coming into this marketplace about products inevitably becoming an insurance policy for weather stress, whether it's heat stress, drought stress, or cold stress. Are there products that make sense in certain situations? Yes. But I think the expectation of what these products can and can't do need to be that conversation point.
Yeah, because, well, it's not like going to save your crop if you don't get any rain or if it's 150 degrees every single day. That's the problem. It's not going to control all of these uncontrollables. Right. It's just kind of helping manage it through the times. Like even last year, we had a couple weeks that were really hot, but it wasn't like that all year. So are there things that can help in those situations, and how do they even help?
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
The question.
Yeah, so we try to communicate to growers. You might be buying yourself 10 days or 14 days of a window where you hope cooler temperatures or warmer temperatures or moisture come into play. And I think that's how we have to look at this is we have to manage windows of time within this crop. We all know that there are more critical times in a corn crop or soybean crop's life that we have to focus on to make sure that we're maximizing yield. And I think some of these products in the marketplace, whether it's an amino acid-based product or maybe it's even a plant growth hormone-based product, there are absolutely products in the market that make sense to help maybe offset some risk of weather in this crop. So there's a product in the marketplace today that a year ago just got registered via the EPA for abiotic losses. It's one of the first products that got registered in the market that the EPA is recognizing this and saying that if you use this product, it will help for abiotic losses.
Now, you say abiotic losses, and my first question is, what are abiotic losses?
Abiotic losses is the new fancy term for weather stress, right? So heat stress, drought stress, cold stress, all tie into abiotic losses. And so that's the term that the EPA has come forward with. This product is now registered. The active ingredient is salicylic acid. What that does in the plant is really interesting. It helps the plant maintain water pressure within each individual plant cell. So when the plant gets put under a tremendous level of stress, you inevitably will start to see cells within the plant start exploding because the plant's looking for carbon to continue the photosynthesis process during high heat. When you add a product like this one into the plant, you're helping that plant maintain its water pressure and making things easier flow within the vascular system of the plant. You'll hear companies talk about triggering the SAR or ISR within the plant, which is the natural defense mechanism of the plant. I think those terms are very loosely thrown around, and I don't think we've done a good job of explaining what that is. But what I try to tell growers is I just had this conversation last week where we had some severe weather in our local area here, and there was a risk of a tornado. What does the National Weather Service do? Fires off the tornado sirens. And those tornado sirens go off as hey, there is an imminent threat headed your direction. Be prepared. That's ultimately what happens with the SAR in a plant is it's the plant's trying to trigger to the rest of its plant cells. There is a potential stress event coming. Prepare yourself. And what does that mean? That means the plant is adding more lignin to the external walls of the plant cell. It's making sure that it has available moisture within inside itself. It's making sure that the right nutrients are in play in the chlorophyll and chloroplast and all the other systems within a plant cell. It's just trying to give that warning signal to the plant that you prepare yourself. So the plant naturally is going to do this with a product like the active that has salicylic acid. We call it Climate King. It's a product that we can apply to the plant to pre-trigger the SIR so that plant is building its defense mechanism. It's only going to last a certain amount of time in that plant where that plant naturally will need to recover where its SAR drops back down. that's kind of the window that we're trying to play, right? Is we want to time it to a major event coming. If you look at a forecast and you see high heat coming in the forecast, extended 90 plus degree temperatures, maybe this is an opportunity to make that application. But that's just one product, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are other products that we have a product in the portfolio and others have that are a living organism that's a fungi. That fungi moves into the plant and it lives within the intercellular walls of the plant, and it goes endophytic, or it becomes as an endophyte. And what that means is the plant will do everything it can to keep that living organism alive, because that living organism is doing everything it can to keep the plant alive. And one of the ways that happens is when a plant gets put under high stress, you have something called oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is inevitably you have a singlet oxygen species that starts spinning out of control within the plant, and it starts attacking the plant cells, blowing them apart, and you have moisture leakage, moisture loss. You also have nutrient loss because of this oxidative species spinning out of control in the plant. The living organism has the ability to capture that within the intercellular of the plant and limit that oxidative stress. So that's super technical. We could go much deeper than that into that particular topic. But specifically for that, there's about 2 weeks worth of protection when we make that particular application. And what we see is canopy temperatures dropping anywhere from 5 to 15 degrees, because you're not seeing this big push of moisture release out of that plant because of the oxidative stress. So there's a lot of things that we're learning here, both with plant growth hormone products, with living organism products. We could even go into the amino acid space, where we have learned that if we have super cloudy days, or maybe we get more Canadian wildfire smoke, which unfortunately for us, past 3-4 years, that wildfire smoke from Canada has become a big issue. When it blocks the UV rays from the sun, it limits the ability for us to maximize photosynthesis. We can apply a plant-based amino acid to the plant that helps that plant become more efficient with photosynthesis. That inevitably is limiting stress to the plant. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, if we think reality of what some of these products can do, but they all have limitations. And I cannot stress that enough. There is no silver bullet in this marketplace, whether it's from us or anybody else in the market, that will truly answer your problems for abiotic losses.
Now, I have two questions. One that's just general and one that's about SAR. But this general one, let's start off with that. So when I first graduated college, it felt like all the biological or natural products were all to like push the plant and to get further along.
Yep.
But this is not necessarily doing that.
Right.
So how is that? Is there a lot? So is it just helping the plant protect it, or is it pushing it and protecting it type of thing? You know what I mean?
That's a great question. We talk to our salespeople about being offensive versus defensive with products. When I think of something like Heat Shield, our living organism product, or Climate King, the salicylic acid, those are very defensive products, right? You're getting a potential yield benefit out of those products by protecting that plant. And I think that's where some of the confusion lies in the market is when these things go to trial and you see a yield response with these products. Was it a yield enhancement or was it a yield protection? And in the case of abiotic loss, you're protecting that plant from that. So that's a very critical thing to understand is when we're making an application of, say, Climate King, we are trying to protect the investment of that particular plant. What the difference becomes in yield isn't necessarily an enhancement. It's a protection. That's ultimately what we protected in that plant. You brought up SAR. I should have brought that up. SAR, for the folks that aren't familiar with that, system acquired resistance. It's just easier to say SAR, but that's the natural defense mechanism of the plant.
Yeah, and so talking about SAR, after you said there's a bunch of products that say that, that just got me thinking I have seen a bunch of that, but now are all those basically triggering SAR the same way, or are they all different ways that they trigger it? Is there only one way to trigger it?
Yeah,
that's my question.
Yeah, there's multiple ways to trigger SAR. There's multiple responses from SAR. You know, there's a EPA registered fungicide product from one of our suppliers today that looks really good in the market that triggers SAR and ISR. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways from a gene expression standpoint in the plant. And again, very technical, but from a grower standpoint, understanding why this is important is an SAR response in the plant is recognized by the EPA. That is a mode of action within the plant that you cannot build resistance. You won't see resistance where, you know, you have herbicide resistance, right? You have fungicidal resistance in the plant. When you're triggering the natural defense mechanism of the plant, you're protecting the plant with its own processes. So I think that's really important as we continue down this frontier of these abiotic losses products, is we're learning more and more about gene expressions, both upregulated and downregulated in the plant. We're learning more about how a plant is managing itself from an oxidative stress standpoint, how we can minimize oxidative stress, and all these little tweaks that we can do within a plant equate to a handful of bushels, right? And if the product is priced correctly and we're making that timing application right before a major event, in many cases, it's made sense for us to have this application to make these products. So again, not a silver bullet, right? There are some companies, unfortunately, I think that are over promoting these products, that they're doing way more than what they actually are. I mean, the reality is you could make micronutrient applications at the right time, and depending on the micronutrients you're working with, will help minimize oxidative stress. They'll help minimize overall stress within the plant, because lack of nutrition in a plant is a stress to the plant. So just growers understand what the expectation of these products are, I think, is the most important conversation to have.
So if you're triggering SAR with name whatever product you want to name, is there too much triggering of SAR, or is that possible to do, or is it only like you just flip on the switch and now it's triggered?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So we had a study last year that we did where we looked at a particular product at every 7 days, then we went every 14 days, and then we went every 28 days. That 7-day application and 14-day application actually became negative to the plant, because that plant was in constant protect mode, constant, I'm under stress, I got to protect. And so any energy that maybe should have went to yield or maybe went to new growth didn't go there because it was used to protect itself. So there's absolutely a line here where many growers like to put more on. And we've had those conversations, right, of putting too much on. And when it comes to plant growth hormones, when it comes to abiotic losses, we absolutely can overdo it. So I tend to recommend to growers, if you're using a product like Climate King, which is salicylic acid, we want to be very careful about being out there more than maybe once a month, right? We don't want to put that plant into a constant level of, I'm protecting myself. We want to have that plant become a little bit offensive to go capture maybe any additional yield that it thinks it can produce. Because at the end of the day, no matter what crop a customer of ours raises, the number one and only job of that crop is to produce offspring. So that's the job of a corn plant, a soybean plant, a wheat crop, canola, whatever we're planting. The job of that plant is to produce something that's offspring. Now we get to have the ability to harvest that, and that's how we make our money. But as long as we understand that, we don't want to make too much level of protection of that plant, because we get that plant to become too defensive.
Because that just kind of, any PGR, plant growth regulator, you can mess things up pretty easily, even with like dicamba, because that's a plant growth regulator
Very
too.
much.
And so any of those, you just want to make sure to be careful and put them at the right timing, because otherwise it can be bad just as fast as it could be good.
Yeah, and understanding too that, there are products in the market that, on a secondary note, can be very beneficial for natural plant growth promotion. Maybe if you stack another PGR on top of that, it could go backwards. And we've seen that happen in some of our trials where you put too many PGRs out, you absolutely can take the plant backwards. And that's the last thing that we want to do.
So the question is, can you control the uncontrollable things like heat stress, drought stress, cold stress? What's your answer to that?
I would say you can absolutely buy yourself a window on time. Can you buy 10 to 14 days with an application? Yes, absolutely. Can you protect for 10 to 14 days for a major heat event? Absolutely, yes. Have we been able to document that? Yes. But if it doesn't rain for 30, 60, 90 days, if it's 100 degrees for 3 weeks straight and no rain and 70 degrees at night, I can't fix that, right? We at the end of the day cannot compete with Mother Nature. Can we try to tame her? A little bit, maybe 5 to 10% of the time. But those 5 to 10%, that makes a big difference when it comes to yield at the end of the day. Every little thing that we do to that plant makes a difference, both positive and negative. So these are absolutely tools. And that's what I try to communicate to everybody in the market, is there are absolutely tools that we can put in the toolbox that when the time comes to use them, let's use them. But we got to understand what their limitations are.
Yeah. Tools at the right timing depending on the crop, how it's looking and stuff like that too, you might want to invest in this or not, depending on what's happening.
Right.
And if it's prolonged negative losses like heat prolonged, it might not make sense, but maybe if it's a couple days, then you might want to get in there early and be ready. How long does that SAR process take to trigger?
So on a product like Climate King, we've been able to document it both externally and in a lab. We can get that response to be fully active in the plant within 18 to 24 hours. So, I mean, it is a very quick response in the plant, but it's something that you got to get active in the plant before the stress comes.
Mm-hmm. Yep, all these different tools. Very interesting. Thanks so much for being on this episode.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the Agronomy Answers podcast. Be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you next week.